Tire information is confusing. Why are there so many numbers on the sidewall of a tire? Why is Reddit telling people to buy tires off of Alibaba? How does Alex look 42 and 16 at the same time? These are the wonders of the world. And while I can't answer that last one, I can answer the first one and tell you why the second one is a stupid one to do. So I'm Alex Martini. Welcome to Martini Works. We help people mod their car over at martiniworks.com. This is not on purpose, but this is one of my favorite shirts that Michelin ever gave me. We're over here on Martini Works and we're talking about useless tire information. Tire information, for some reason, everybody loves to talk about and nobody really cares to remember. I'm not entirely sure why. For the longest time, I really didn't even understand tires. I think the most confusing part to me was when I went from knowing car tires to truck tires and trying to understand why something would be a 255 or a 275, and then in America land, it was
a 35, 12 and a half, 20.
We're not talking about truck tires today. We're talking about car tires. Let's talk about some things that you may not know. Number one, the UTQG is the Uniform Tire Quality Grade. The UTQG is a myth, and it really only makes sense if you want it to. And I need to explain this one very carefully. The actual treadwear grades are based on a test, where a test tire is ran on a 400-mile loop in Texas for 7,200 miles. Then they compare that test tire to a tire that you bring, and it's measured and compared to that reference tire and ran under the same conditions. If the test tire is expected to last as long as the reference tire, it receives a grade of 100, meaning that test tire wears a certain amount, your Michelin Pilot Sport 4S wears the same amount. It's a UTQG of 100. Right? So far, so good. Great, because the rest is confusing, just like algebra. If it's expected to last twice as long, it would receive a grade of 200. 3 times as long, 300, etc., etc. Here's why it's kind of a myth. The first thing is that after 7,200 miles, the test can conclude. It no longer needs to go any further. So what ends up happening is people will make assumptions as to how long a tire can last based upon 7,200 miles, which sometimes means you'll see companies talk about how they have a 50,000 mile warranty, but they never actually tested that against any sort of reference tire or anything like that. So the reason that makes no sense is because when you see a UTQG of 500 or 600 or 400, a lot of times that's a marketing team putting that number on that because they actually never got to a final number as to how much longer it would last to a reference tire. There's another myth with the UTQG thing, which is that they're all referenced across brands. That's also not true. So a Continental at a 200 treadwear is not the same thing as a Michelin at a 200 treadwear because the reference tires are different, the test tires are different, which means the ratio is the same, but the actual rest of it is completely different variables. So don't try to go out there and compare a 200 to a 200 when they're from two different brands. In fact, also, sometimes brands like Nitto use different reference tires for their UTQG based upon the type of tire that they're running, which makes obvious sense. So a 200 treadwear on a summer tire is not the same as a 200 treadwear on a winter tire. Why would you ever use this number? It's just a good reference point. It's good to know because typically treadwear can help you understand how long a tire is supposed to last. But that also leads into another kind of myth. This myth is like brand new. Heard this on TikTok. I've seen it a ton. And that's that UTQG treadwear, the lower that number is, the better it is for drifting. I don't know where this started, whether this was like Formula Drift, people are watching 1,300 horsepower Ben Von Gittin Jr. LZs drift around Boschi's fire-blowing S chassis, but you don't have that, and I don't have that. We have a 200 horsepower box, and we're just trying to make tires last as long as humanly possible. Having more grip for your 200 horsepower box is not a good idea, and you don't want to use treadwear as the sole determination for a good drift tire. A lot of times, if you're looking for drifting specifically, you want something that can handle heat cycles really well. If you have a heavier drift car, you want something that has some pretty good load ratings, just because sometimes those skinnier boys will have a tendency to break a belt because they can't handle big Berthas like the Nissan Gloria. But for the most part, you know, what matters most, like I said, ability to handle sidewall load is also really important, especially for drifting, and is kind of built like a brick house. A lot of times, cheaper tires are actually better for drifting because they're made Usually, with a single compound, very basic ply tire, very basic cord structure, very basic tread wear, and it's all uniform. It's a symmetrical tire design, and pretty much the cheaper you get with tires, they just throw a bunch of rubber at it, they pray that it works, and hopefully a 50,000 mile warranty convinces you to buy them. A lot of times, that's why you see tires like the Kenda Vezda KR20, the Accelera 651 Sport, the Nexen SU1, and you don't see somebody talking about the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S. Now, don't tell Michelin, but I did drift on them once at US Air, and it was a terrible idea. They did it, but the compound just did not like it at all. Now, number 3, this is something that is the most useless piece of information that I wish wasn't useless. Tire companies have warranties, and some of them are really freaking good, like properly good. I've used them almost all the time. I hate getting into the whole spiel about warranties or anything like that, or getting that little extended warranty card, but you should do it with tires. The reason we talk about Continental a lot, especially on the Martini Works side of things, is because they have a warranty program where if tires need to be serviced in the first 12 months, they'll replace them. They have mileage warranties up to 80,000 miles. If you don't like them in the first 60 days, you can return them. You can get a new tire if you puncture one with their road hazard insurance within the first 12 months. You get 150 miles of free towing if you get a flat. They'll help cover trip expenses. There's a little bit of work to set up for it, but it's one of those things where it's huge. And we've tried talking about it in the past, and everybody just kind of gets this like glazy eye look to it. But if you're spending money on tires, do a lot of research on it, or just listen to us and say, there's a really good warranty out there for Continental, buy Continental, get the warranty program, because if something happens to the tires, 9 times out of 10, they'll actually cover it. And sometimes that's why tires are a little bit more expensive than some of the cheaper ones out there, where you're kind of just screwed if you don't have it. The 4th thing to talk about is that tires aren't always linear in terms of like performance equals more expensive. A lot of times people want to get the most expensive thing. 9 times out of 10, it just so happens to be a Michelin, or it just so happens to be a Pirelli. But that doesn't inherently mean that it's going to be the best for you just because it's the most expensive. Lots of tires can be broken down into 5 categories: sound, longevity, performance, or what we would call like dry grip, value, and then sometimes there's a conversation about wet or snow performance. With tires, treat it kind of like a what is that? What's a 5-sided shape? Pentagon? Treat it like you've got the thing I just said. So sound on one corner, longevity, performance, value, and wet and snow. And then you take an eye drop and you kind of throw a bunch of water in there. A lot of times, tires, when they're made, they're built to be pointed in one direction, like one category of thing. They're meant to be really good in the sound department and maybe okay in the value department. They're really good in the dry grip and they last a really long time. A lot of times when you look at a performance of a tire, you're gonna see it do 2 things usually good, 1 thing okay, and 2 things not so good. When you get more expensive in tires, you'll see that 5-pointed pentagon get more filled out across the board of all the performances, typically is how you see that. And that's why tires are more expensive. A lot of times people will say, oh, I bought a cheap tire, they did just fine, I didn't notice anything compared to like a more expensive tire. But the thing is that they haven't gotten them up to temp to watch them fail when comparing to like something like a DWS 06 Plus or an Extreme Contact Sport 02. Now, I'm not just dogging on Continental saying that they're best and go buy them. There's lots of fantastic tires. Yokohama makes good tires, Michelin makes good tires, Falcon makes good tires, General's actually really good like budget tire that you can jump into. But what it comes down to is we've seen a lot of people say, I don't know why I would spend more money on a tire. It lasted me a long time. It's like, well, yeah, but it was only built to last a long time. It wasn't built to also be good in wet, or it wasn't also good to be quiet. You don't notice that because you're putting it on a rust bucket S chassis, but tire companies will build things to be quieter or louder to save money or to spend money. Now, since we do a lot of wheel and tire packaging, that's like our #1 thing here at martiniworks.com. I know it sounds very familiar to the past, but we love doing it. It's what we do. We're really good at it. We sell a ton of works. We're super happy to see people buying good, authentic product, like stuff we can brag about and be proud of. And also the budget stuff, the Koenigs and the Enkis and the stage wheels and things like that, and the Kanseis. We love all of that because we can stand behind it. But one thing we've really noticed, especially recently, is that there's a lack of knowledge as to how those things compare together, which is why we're talking about it again. A 225/40 from Michelin is not the same in terms of total sizing when you compare it to a Continental or even a Dunlop or even a Nexen. Because tires are all made differently, their sidewalls can be different. Something like a Michelin, especially a Sport Cup 2, if you look at the tire, the sidewall is very square. It's very, very square. When you look at something like a Continental, it's very like angled. It's very circular. If you look at something like even a Kenda, the Kendas almost come like pre-bent because they know you're gonna stretch the shit out of them. They can all be 225/40s, and you're gonna see that the shape that they have on that sidewall is different. Now, a lot of times too, a Sport Cup 2, for instance, is gonna actually have a bunch of technology in that sidewall, or how they actually design the sidewall to handle that lateral load differently. Whereas something like a Continental may be built not to have as much or have more because it's doing more daily driving. Whereas something more budget like a General or even an Exxon may not have any technology in that sidewall at all. And the only thing that it's intended to do is not blow up. Totally happens. I get it. There is a mix up with tire sizing. I feel like I don't mean to be weird about it, but like tire sizing gets fucked up all the time. Dude, it's so bad. I mess it up all the time too, so don't feel bad. But remember, the first number is section width. That's the width of the tire's plantation on the road. It's ass in the grass, so to speak. It's not the total length. It is the section width. Typically, you'd see it where the tread starts and stops, give or take a little bit. The second number is an aspect ratio of that section width. It's literally a percentage. The 40 is not a number. The 40 is a percentage of the section width of a 225. The last number is the diameter. If you mess that one up, we'll tell you because the tire is not going to literally mount onto the wheel and we're going to have to call you. Stretching a tire can be a math formula too, if you want it to. It's not perfect math, but it helps get you in the right area. So for instance, if you need a touch more stretch, right? Let's say you're gonna buy a 225/40, for instance, you can stretch it a little bit by going to a 215/40. But you could also stretch it by going to a 225/35 and get a pretty close match to what a 215/40 stretch would also look like. So people, when they go down to stretch a tire, a lot of times they only use section width to go down as a variable to get what they want. You can actually use the aspect ratio number as well. If you really want to fine tune your fitment, you want to be a stance god, you want to tell Stancy Pants to not light his shit on fire, and this is how you actually build a car. If you want to get that specific, you can. And it's really simple math, and it's going to be a really great way to dial in some really killer fitment. I've gotten it right, and it's looked absolutely incredible, and I've gotten it wrong where sometimes I've had to do it twice. So if you have any questions on that, let us know below. We'd be happy to help you. I caught a lot of hell for this back in the day, and I still stand for this like to this day. I treat a proper wheel and tire fitment as a straight up and down kind of size. 225/40 on an 8.5 is pretty much just straight up and down, not too much bow, not too much stretch. I would call that perfect, okay? Maybe not on the car, but in terms of a tire fitting to a wheel, it's perfect. Whether you go down to a 215, you're gonna see that tire come in a little bit. If you go to a 225/35, you're gonna see that tire come in a little bit. 205/40, same thing. Every time you go down in a section width or go down in like an aspect ratio, I typically would call that like a stage 1 stretch. And the reason that I say that is because you're stretching a little bit from what I would call a perfect setup. If you go down even further from a 215 to a 205/40, then you have a stage 2 stretch. The reason that I say this is because it'll help you understand how far down you really need to go. You don't need to go down that far to get a really heavy stretch. Now, if you don't like stretching, don't get mad at me. I get it. I understand it. But some people, they fucking love Suicide Boys and they just want to ball out in LS. And to that, I say fucking go get them, okay? I think that's dope. But if you want to get it right and you don't want to waste money on tires, you got to make sure you measure first, measure twice, cut once, pray to God you got it right. If you want a more meaty setup, same thing applies. You go with a 235/40 or even a 245/40, and you're going to see that tire start to kind of come over the wheel, and it's going to get fatter and fatter and fatter. And people that really like that setup, or they want to have that setup for function, I think that looks super good too. Tires got all sorts of shit happening in them. Tread design, a lot of people buy them because they just look cool. Totally agree. But there is a purpose for some of the design. So I'm going to walk through it. On the outside, ribs, those are the raised section of the tread pattern. They're made up of tread blocks. More of these will generally mean more traction, and it's usually less good in bad weather. 2, grooves are those deep channels which run circumventually, you get what I mean, and laterally around the tire, allowing the tread box to flex. So remember when you're driving around on a tire, what happens is you got a bunch of pressure on a tire and those tread blocks actually move and shake, and depending on how hot they get, they can absorb and they can push and they can move. Depending on how much of that movement is occurring in relation to if there's anything in those channels or anything in between the tread blocks, whether that's rain or snow or some sort of debris, that is going to ultimately determine how good your tire behaves. A lot of times that's why you see even a Sport Cup 2, which is supposed to be a high performance track only style tire, you're still going to see those spaces for evacuation of rain or things like that, or even the way for the tread blocks to differentiate from the outside of the tire to the inside of the tire, because the inside of the tire is doing something different from the outside. Now, the sipes, those are those small little thin slots that are molded into the tread blocks. Those have their purpose as well. And how a tread block moves and rotates under heat, that is typically what you'll feel when you're driving. Now, you'll notice a good all-season or winter tire is going to have a directional tread pattern with more lateral grooves to prevent hydroplaning. You can go to an asymmetrical tire tread design that has two different tread designs. You'll typically notice the outside has rigid tread blocks to keep up with high-speed cornering and grip, but the inner tread has a goal to kick out the water and a single middle section for a constant contact patch. Continentals, they have a lot of asymmetrical designs. The big thing I want you to hear is that they typically have a purpose. I get hell for this too, but you guys can tell your friends. You do not want to beat the crap out of brand new tires. I can only speak for Michelin guaranteed, but still to this day, tread and tires that come out of the factory do still have a very light silicone oily style substance that sits on top of the rubber. That's to get the tire out of the mold, and that's also to get the tire to your door without the rubber deteriorating or having any sort of issue or having contact with any sort of fluid that could come around. Because of that, it takes some time to actually get that shit off of your tire. It can take up to 50 miles. Usually what I say is a gallon of gas. Once that comes off, you'll actually notice there's a slight difference in color, and then you're ready to rock and roll. So if you get a new set of tires, don't bang on them right away. A lot of times they're way slipperier than how they're supposed to be, which can make it really matter if you're taking a car out to a track. I've actually done that with my own cars. I've taken a brand new set of tires out, went onto the track, and felt like I was literally driving around on ice. I thought I hated the tires. Turns out I did not give them the chance to actually get all that junk off of it. Once I got the junk off, they heated up correctly, I was good to go, and it made me very, very happy. Now, why did I explain all this? Tires have a ton of myths around them. I see it on Reddit all the time. What's the best tire for drifting? What's the best tire for track racing? What's the best tire for my GR86 or my Nissan 350Z? And a lot of times people are hoping that there is a single tire to solve that solution. And there isn't, because buying tires requires you to kind of make a choice as to what complements your driving behavior the best. There is not a one size fits all. I can try to break it down for you to say this. If you are really out there and you're trying to get as much of a performance out of a tire as you can, and this car is only going to the track and you're trying to save as much money as you can, usually you're gonna see Yokohama mentioned more often than not. If you're looking for something where it's good on the track, but is also going to be the car that you drive home, you are going to see Continental mentioned a ton. The Extreme Contact Sport 02 and the DWS 06 Plus are just banging tire options. If you're looking for something where you have maybe a little bit more money and you're really trying to get a tire that you're not sacrificing anything for at all, that's when Michelin gets mentioned. Michelin is a very high performance oriented tire. It's not the best at any one thing, but just like I talked about in that like 5 shaped thing, it can do almost all 5 or 4 out of the 5 very, very well. That's why Michelin has always been just such an incredible tire for people. And then finally, if you're just trying to get something that's budget or cheap oriented, something that you can burn really fast, something that's more drift oriented, Kendas are gonna be a really good option. Nexans are gonna be a really good option. Achilles are gonna be a really good option. But it's gonna come down to how much horsepower you have. The more horsepower you have, the more money you're gonna need to spend on a higher quality tire. And typically those tend to burn a little bit faster when you start looking at the cheaper stuff like Achilles. Honestly, Kenda's been really great at that. I'd highly recommend them. Yokohama's good, Nexen is good, Conti is good, Michelin is good. But if you don't know which one to buy and you need help and you're trying to pick up a wheel and tire package, get it from the folks who give a shit over here at martiniworks.com. You can shoot us a message on the website. You can ask us as many questions as you could possibly need. We are here to help you every step of the way because we're looking at every single order that goes out of our tiny little shop because we want to make sure that it's perfect. So we hope you enjoyed this. If you have any more questions about tires, let us know below. We'll be responding to as many as we can. And of course, thank you so much for watching. I'm Alex Martini. Hope you're subscribed. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.